I'm here today to talk about creativity, and specifically, I'm going to be focusing on the importance of building mobile first. I'm going to be sharing some creative best practices, tips and tricks that hopefully will help you to grow your business. So welcome to Brandcamp Day 2. I'm Marta, and I'm a creative strategist working for Facebook and Instagram Creative Shop team. For those of you who don't know what's Creative Shop, it's the creative team from Facebook, and our mission is to democratize creativity. So before we jump in, let's go back and take a look at the history of direct response creative. So from print to TV to the first right-hand side ads on Facebook, as well as the link ads. So what we see is that the creative process hasn't changed. You still need to think about what's the objective and the challenge that you're trying to solve, what's the audience that you want to reach, and then what's the message and idea that you want to share with them so that they can take the action that you want them to take. But times are changing, and the widespread adoption of mobile presents a new opportunity for all of us. So if you think about how many different people see different types of feeds on their phones, it's very important that you think that your piece of content will appear in the middle of many other pieces of content, from not only other brands, but also from your friends, from businesses that you follow. And so it's very important that you create content that is relevant for the audience that you're trying to reach, and that you have a key message so that they can understand what are you trying to tell them. Mobile is fast, and we know that people scroll through 300 feet of content every day, which is the same size as the Statue of Liberty. So it's very important to build content that is thumb-stopping and relevant to your audience. So again, with all that in mind, today we're gonna provide some tips and tricks and some tools that will help you to do that. Creative is critical, and from recent studies that we have been running, we have seen that 56% of a brand sales lift can be attributed to the high-quality creative content that they have used. So what's the first thing that someone sees when they see a piece of content on their newsfeed? Well, the first thing is the video or image that appears on the screen. Secondly is the copy. Thirdly, we see that it's the brand, and finally it's the comments. So when you think about how to create your content, it's very important to focus on what's that image or video and that, the specific content that you want to share, but also it's important to keep in mind the message and have it clear and concise so that they know exactly what are you trying to transmit them. So we know that better creative drives better impact. And here we see an example of a brand that simply by adding some lightweight motion to their text, they saw a 22% increase on their sales versus only running a still alone. So how do we get to better creative? Well, by knowing the rules, innovating with them, and also knowing and learning from testing. So it's very important that when you run campaigns, you test and learn so that you understand how you can improve in the future. So let's start with mobile best practices. The first one is how we can make sure that you are creating content that is short. In this case, we recommend a duration of maximum 15 seconds. So if you can keep it between 6 and 10, that's the ideal spot. Secondly, how we can make sure that we are designing for sound off. So we know that a lot of people consume content when they are on the way commuting and they cannot have their sound on their mobile phones. So it's very important that they are able to understand the message that you're trying to communicate with them without having the sound on. However, we see that specifically for Instagram stories, people are watching pieces of content using sound on. So make sure that you design for sound off, but you delight with sound on. And finally, the third one is how you can make sure that you're framing your story visually. So making sure that you're adapting the piece of content that you're creating to fit for the different placements. So in this case, 9:16 when you want to use stories, and 4:5 or 1:1 when you want to place your piece of content on your newsfeed. So let's move on now to some creative considerations. So I'm going to first give you a brief summary of all of them, and then we are going to go deeper into each of them in detail. The first one is how we can combine static with video. So what we see is that by combining static images with video in the same campaign, that helps drive better conversions. Secondly, how we can highlight the brand early. So as we said, it's very important to show at least your brand logo at the very beginning of your video. Thirdly, how you can play showcasing your product or service, making sure that it's the focus of your piece of content. Fourth, it's very important to get noticed. So again, how we can create content that is thumb-stopping. And we're going to see some tools and tips and tricks to do that. And then finally, we are going to talk about some copy, so some techniques on how you can create a message that is very clear and concise, and how you can also play with different types of formats depending on the placement that you're choosing to run your campaign. So let's start with the first one, which is combining both still with video. So what we see, again, is that when you run a campaign for specifically a direct response objective, it's better if you combine a still image together with a video. And we have seen that that has driven 17% higher conversion lift versus static images alone. So here we can see an example from a brand which ran a campaign combining both static and video, and they saw a 90% increase in conversion rates. So let's have a look to several ways where you can add motion to your static images. So here you can see different examples. The first one would be how you can play with basic motion. So in this case, how you can very simply add some motion to your images that you have already. Secondly, how you can play with the brand in motion. So in this case, if you have a logo, how you can add some motion into that logo and incorporate it into your video. Thirdly, is playing with your benefits. So in this case, you should define which are the benefits that describe better your brand and how you can add some motion again to some of them. And finally, how you can play with demo in motion. So in this case, if you have, for example, a mobile app, or if you have a service that offers different ways where your consumers can use your service, how you can show that again in motion in your campaigns. So the next one, it's highlighting the brand early on. So let's have a look to some examples of different businesses that are playing with their brand on different ways. So the first one, we see how they play with logos and fonts. So how they can show their brand early on in the video and show both, their logos and the typeface that they have, so that their consumers will be able to recognize them easily. You can also play with your brand colors. So if you have a color palette, make sure that you incorporate that into your content and you build that brand consistently. And finally, if you have a product and your brand appears in your product, make sure that you place it as well in the center of the video that you're trying to make, so that people will not only recognize your product, but also will be able to see your brand. Moving on, let's talk about different ways that you can showcase your product or service. So we have here different examples. In the first one, you can see a brand that is playing with different variants of their product or service in the video they are showing. In the second example, we see how you can play with showing different tutorials or demos of your product. So in this case, if you're a beauty brand, you can show different ways that you can put your makeup on. If you're a restaurant, you can show the behind the scenes or different ways to create or to prepare your recipe. And in the last example, we see a different company that it's focusing on showing their product from different angles. So here, make sure that your product, there's one focus, one focal point, so that people can easily see the product that you are trying to sell, and that you're showing as well different angles of it, so that they have an idea of what's inside or how it looks like from different angles before they actually buy it. Another creative consideration that is very important to take into account is getting noticed. So in this case, let's talk about how you can create content that is thumb-stopping. Remember that Animoto has a new feature, which is the photo burst, which will allow you to do that very easily. And here we can see several examples from different brands that are doing it in different ways. So the first example, you can see how this brand is playing with different color backgrounds. The second example is a different business. In this case, they are showing their products in a carousel format. And again, they are playing with different ways to show their product, adding some motion and creating some contrast. And finally, the last example, we are seeing how this other brand is playing with text captions. So in this case, you can also create content that is thumb-stopping, playing with the copy. Let's talk now about how you can provoke and promote. So having a look at different pieces of copy, make sure that you are asking questions or showing promos to your audience. So make sure that you create your copy very short and clear. It's better if you use less than 280 characters, and make sure that there's a clear call to action that they can easily see, because that would help them to take it. Last but not least, let's talk about how you can play with different formats. So here we have an example from a different brand that in this case they decided to run a campaign using different placements. So in this case they built a vertical video, 9:16 for stories, a 4:5 for Instagram feed, and one by one for Facebook feed. Specifically for vertical, I believe that it's on the roadmap for Animoto's product. So hopefully you will be able to use it very soon. So just before we finish, let's do a recap of all the different creative considerations that we have been talking about. The first one was how we can combine static and video together in the same campaign, specifically for direct response objectives. The secondly is how you can highlight the brand early on. Thirdly, how you can showcase your product or service in different ways. We also talked about how you can build content that is thumb-stopping so that it gets noticed easily. And then finally, we talked about different ways that you can play with your copy to provoke and promote your different products and services. And we also talked about different ways where you can play with your formats, from vertical to square, depending on the placement that you're going to use. Thanks for tuning in. If you missed day one, you can catch up below, or otherwise join the Animoto's Facebook group and see the watch party next Friday. For day 3, Sally is going to show you how to put into action all the different creative considerations that we have been talking about today, and also she's going to show you the new photo burst feature that Animoto is launching soon.